Welcome to the intro. Hold on, there's a resub.
Crime time, crime time, crime time.
That's right, it's crime time. So, welcome. If you're watching this on YouTube, you missed the Twitch stream, but I stream almost every single day, except Sundays usually, so feel free to watch the live streams. We are going to watch some true crime. If you don't know, a lot of these come from the reaction channel on my Discord, so if you haven't joined my Discord, please do that. And if you're watching on YouTube, you should subscribe to the channel you're watching it on because, you know, that would be really cool of you. Intro time. Let's watch another video today by Moon Channel. Why do lawyers want to abolish ICE? I can think of plenty of good reasons. So let's find out more. Oops.
I want to begin by stating what this video is not. I'm not here to win an argument or to bludgeon anyone on either side of the partisan divide. I'm here because I believe there's an issue that cuts deeper than partisanship. An issue that touches upon the very core of the American project. This video is different from my previous ones. There are no video games, there's no cultural discussion. There's only law.
What is happening?
And history. By trade, I'm a lawyer. Some of you have heard me talk at length about intellectual property law, but in truth, my primary specialty is immigration. I just happen to also think, study, and write a great deal about legal theory more broadly.
How about that?
I've thought long and hard about making this video on ICE, on U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, because I've always wanted this channel to feel thoughtful, wholesome, and accessible. But there are times, I think, when the choice to be silent, to bury one's head in the sand, is irresponsible at best and morally wrong at worst.
Yes.
And given the circumstances in that
Holy
respect,
shit, this
I
guy's
think
so
the
cool already.
Rubicon has finally been crossed for me. The title of this video, I understand, will unsettle some of you. Mooney, I can hear you say, are you suggesting that lawyers like yourself want to do away with immigration and customs enforcement altogether? To just open the borders, letting anyone come in without rules and laws? The answer is unequivocally no. That's not the argument.
Literally the most straw man of arguments ever. Oh, so you want to blow up everything and have it not exist? Yeah. Yeah, actually. Yeah. No. Are you a fucking idiot? Are you 4? Were you told no and had a melt? Like, what are we talking about? What do you mean? It's like when people say defund the police, they're like, oh, so you want the police gone? You want the police gone? Fucking no. Like, what? Trillions of dollars go into the police every year by our tax dollars into unnecessary shit just for them to have less training, less experience, and less moral, like, accountability. Why the fuck do they need all that? So they can have a bunch of tear gas to shoot into a peaceful protest? Like, are we stupid?
And it never has been. Lawyers have been calling for the abolition of ICE for years, not because we oppose immigration enforcement, but because ICE as an institution is extremely unusual in American law.
Yes.
The legal mechanisms that define it are anomalous, and those legal anomalies carry real constitutional danger.
And they're specific
ICE
to them
is not
only.
just another law enforcement agency. It's a federal police force built on a legal foundation unlike any other in the United States.
Built on racism.
And under the wrong conditions, those foundations make ICE uniquely vulnerable to abuse. It only needs the right triggers. What follows then is my warning to anyone who will listen. If we do not abolish ICE, if we do not replace it with something less dangerous, then someday these risks will become irreversible. Maybe not today, God willing, hopefully not anytime soon, but someday, nevertheless. Let me help you understand my warning by starting at the very beginning. To understand why ICE is so dangerous, we have to go back to the very origins of America.
I mean,
To understand why
look
ICE
at
is
that.
so dangerous.
Why are we strapped up? Why are we insanely strapped up?
We have to go back to the very origins of America. The framers of the Constitution, our founding fathers, dreamt of a country free of the tyranny of kings and noblemen. They had just fought a war of revolution, and they together
Yes.
shared no greater fear than backsliding into tyranny once more.
Almost like the context of the amendments that were written at the time they were written are as important as the rules within them. And taking it out of context to bend the rules to a modern society that has different problems and bigger demons is just ridiculously stupid and the biggest forehead take ever.
One sees again and again in their writings the fear of tyranny, with a particular concern over the powers of the executive branch, the presidency. In the Federalist Papers, number 47, James Madison, the father of the Constitution himself and our fourth president, stated to the people of the state of New York the following: "The accumulation of all powers, legislative, executive, and judiciary, in the same hands, whether of one, a few, of many, and whether hereditary, self-appointed, or elective, may justly be pronounced the very definition of tyranny." Alexander Hamilton, arguably the framer most friendly to the idea of a strong executive branch, stated in Federalist number 25 that the instruments by which the liberties of a people are destroyed are in constant progression. Power can never be safely trusted to any hands without checks. To account for the power of the executive branch, a system of checks and balances was built into the Constitution. Each branch of the government, the executive, the legislative, and the judicial, would balance the other so that no one entity or person could seize total power. Administrative seizure by a popular demagogue, perhaps, could be ostensibly halted by checks and balances and an expansion of states' rights. But there was still the threat of tyranny by force of arms. Might makes right. As James Madison said aloud in a speech to the Constitutional Convention of 1787, a standing military force with an overgrown executive will not long be safe companions to liberty. The means of defense against foreign danger have always been the instruments of tyranny.
Founding father, by the way, saying that. A standing military force with an overgrown executive will not be safe companions to liberty. I mean, literally a founding father of the United States hundreds of years ago said this. And people are still wanting ICE to have more leeway, less responsibility, less accountability, as they continuously infringe on freedoms that were given to us by the very same people they are literally pretending that they care or worship about. How can you? I mean, it's it's the source. It's the source of the entire, like.
Hello streamer and hello freaks, 18 months yippee.
What else is there to say about it?
Abolish ICE and love your neighbor.
As such, the power of checks and balances was deliberately extended over the use of the armed forces. Congress is supposed to control the armed forces. It alone has the constitutional power to raise armies, fund them, and make rules governing them.
I am
the
super
executive
late,
is meant to
but
be the
I am
commander-in-chief, who is meant to have control only over forces lawfully raised and funded by Congress.
And
We could spend a long time talking about how that dynamic has changed, but it's beside the point.
Reagan.
The framers were deeply concerned about an executive branch with too much power over the military, and their fear has been deeply baked into American jurisprudence. After the Civil War, for example, Congress passed the Posse Comitatus Act of 1878, which limits the use of federal military personnel to enforce domestic law or by other government entities such as county sheriffs and justices of the peace. The act originally applied only to the Army, but it was amended in 1956 to include the Air Force, and in 2021, very early on in the Biden presidency, the National Defense Authorization Act further expanded the scope to cover the Navy, Marines, and Space Force. Why 2021 and with such urgency,
Space
I wonder?
Force.
Well, who can say? In any case, policing, you will notice, conspicuously absent from the Constitution.
God, I wonder if
because
they
it was never meant
anticipated
to be
this,
a
but then
federal
did
power
nothing
to begin
about
with.
it. That's crazy.
The framers assumed that the ordinary enforcement of law, such
Surely
as arrests,
not.
detentions, and the use of force
There's
against
no way.
civilians would remain local and subject to direct judicial oversight. The takeaway is, the Constitution and Congress together built a web of protections which are meant to hinder and fragment the power of the executive branch to wield force. And while those protections have not always succeeded when it comes to foreign deployments, they have largely held when it comes to the use of force domestically. But there is one area of law where the executive branch has disproportionate and virtually unchecked power to use force domestically, and that area is immigration. The Constitution vaguely vests the power of immigration with Congress. Article 1, Section 8 states that Congress has both the power to establish a uniform rule of naturalization and to regulate commerce with foreign nations. There's also the Migration or Importation Clause in Article 1, Section 9, which involves the migration or importation of people. Congress, not just in immigration but generally speaking, writes the rules. The executive branch, the president's branch, is so named because it is meant to execute what Congress delineates. Congress legislates the form. The president executes the function. From the founding of the country,
The president
until the late
gives the
1800s,
thumbs up,
Congress
essentially.
wielded immigration policy at a macro level. Enforcement was crude but narrow, and while federal immigration officers existed, they were largely clerical and port-based. Back then, the northern and southern borders were porous, and there weren't airports yet to worry about. In fact, enforcement of immigration controls was largely state-based. This changed in 1876 when the U.S. Supreme Court declared state-level immigration laws unconstitutional, from which followed the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882 and subsequent Supreme Court cases over its legality.
Yeah, you'll be shocked to find out what cases made that happen.
States, often famously called the Chinese Exclusion Case, opened the door to a doctrine in immigration law known as plenary power, derived from the Latin plenus, meaning full power. In that case, the court described the power to exclude non-citizens as a matter of national sovereignty and foreign relations, and as such, immigration as a field of law was placed largely beyond ordinary judicial scrutiny. This was reinforced in 1893 in the holding of Feng Rieting v. United States, and then formalized in
Immigration laws are
1950 in
racist.
United States ex rel. Knopf v. Shaughnessy, which ruled that the executive and legislative branches have the inherent power, plenary authority, to exclude immigrants at the threshold of entry, and that non-citizens seeking initial admission have no
Almost like the entire idea of preventing people from being where you are because you don't like them is inherently racist. It's a crazy take, I know.
constitutional right to judicial review beyond what Congress provides.
Sneak, I need
Quoting directly
names
from the
for
decision,
3 blue axos.
whatever the procedure
Blue,
Kern 3.
like axolotls? Bert, Dave, and Finkel.
authorized by Congress is, it is due process as far as an alien denied entry is concerned. The only other plenary powers are war powers and foreign affairs, Indian affairs, and authority over U.S. territories, but all of these are either outwardly facing or narrow in scope. There's truly nothing like immigration law as a field where there is so much power involving so much of the population concentrated in a virtually unchecked judicial environment. But this is just the beginning, with one branch of the government having removed itself from checks and balances, only two remain, and Congress, it turns out, also removes its discretion from the field of immigration. Just after the Che-Chan-Ping case came the Immigration Act of 1891, which shifted immigration inspection and processing from the states to the federal government. Ellis Island, the famous immigration station here in New York, opened on January 2, 1892. But the Immigration Act of 1891 did more than just shift immigration processing from state to federal jurisdiction. It also gave the executive branch explicit authority to deport immigrants who had entered unlawfully or were in excludable categories. Our modern immigration policies still use language and standards which originated from that act, by the way, including public charge and crimes of moral turpitude. In any case, the scope of immigration law was expanding rapidly. But as the scope grew, it became increasingly unwieldy for Congress to manage. By the period of the early Cold War, the federal government's immigration requirements outweighed the capacity of Congress to handle. Congress needed immigration to be flexible, quick, and most importantly, politically detached from themselves. They wanted plausible deniability, insulation from direct accountability concerning the suppression of ideology. The Internal Security Act of 1950, for example, amended the Immigration Act of 1918 by adding new grounds of exclusion to members of communist parties, language which also continues to exist to this very day. And these needs culminated in the Immigration and Nationality Act of 1952, or the McCarran-Walter Act, which specifically moved the micromanagement of immigration into the executive branch. Congress retained the power to define categories, but the executive was given more explicit power to define enforcement priorities, the timing and resource allocation, interpretation of the law itself, and the procedural details of enforcement. Which is to say, Congress began to delegate its constitutional immigration powers to the executive branch. The INA created a permanent administrative, okay, let me repeat that because it's very important, administrative immigration system. The INA cements deportation as a civil matter, immigration detention as administrative, and immigration adjudication, immigration courts as outside of Article 3, outside of the judiciary, reinforcing plenary power. Now, some immigration-related conduct is criminalized under Title 8 and Title 18, including alien smuggling, human trafficking, and illegal re-entry after removal, amongst others. When charged, those offenses are supposed to be adjudicated in Article 3 courts, with all of the protections of the criminal justice system. But in truth, the vast majority of immigration enforcement actions proceed exclusively through the civil system, even where criminal charges are legally available. That's done by choice, and it has consequences. The civil track allows the government to detain, transfer, and remove individuals while bypassing the procedural safeguards that would otherwise apply in a criminal prosecution.
Yup.
There's a secondary consequence, too.
Almost like they know what they're doing is bad and that they should be getting in trouble. Almost like they're completely aware of the main issue of how they're conducting what they're doing.
By choosing civil enforcement over criminal prosecution, the system sacrifices finality. Removal is fast, but it is not decisive. The same individuals may be detained, removed, and re-encountered again, and again, and again. This is only possible because immigration enforcement primarily operates outside of the criminal process. I cannot emphasize this enough. Immigration enforcement is not criminal prosecution.
Which is stupid, given the entire argument is pretending that a bunch of people are criminals and need to be deported. And I'm sure he's getting into it. Once again, this circumvents any criminal processing and procedure that would even happen. Court cases are completely different based off of which court it's involved in. Like, you hear words like civil court, criminal court. Those are two different things. Those are two different ballparks. Same stadium, or different stadiums, I guess, in a way. So the same rules don't apply. There's more leeway, less scrutiny, less responsibility. So essentially, and once again, this is probably completely deliberate because these racist fucks just want to get away with whatever they're allowed. It's completely deliberate in order to circumvent the system that actually is meant to punish them for abuse of power in which they're continuously enacting, and have been for decades, but especially now because we have a president who ran another campaign off of immigration and the prejudices that they bring up and allowing people's fear-mongering and stereotyping and all sorts of nonsense to play a huge factor in what they think is reality. So now we have millions of Americans who live in a state of delusion, convinced that like anybody who has a darker skin color is about to like stab them in their home for some fucking reason because they sit there and listen to an 80-year-old man who poops himself say that Mexicans bad, and they pee their pants and go, oh my God, we have to do something. So it's baffling to me, man.
Immigration enforcement is administrative and civil law. When you go into 26 Federal Plaza here in New York City and you go up to the immigration courts, those are executive branch adjudicators, not Article 3 judges. If you appeal your case, it goes to the Board of Immigration Appeals or the aptly named Administrative Appeals Office, both of which fall under the purview of the U.S. Department of Justice, which is headed by the U.S. Attorney General, who reports directly to the President. In any case, after the 1952 INA, Congress only continued to delegate its power, moving immigration further and further into the nearly exclusive control of the executive branch. For example, an amendment to the INA was passed in 1965, the Hart-Celler Act, which on the one hand ended a lot of the
So yeah, basically what we're going to do is we're going to have the check served directly under the balance. So when the balance isn't, the check can be extremely biased and just allow it. Any questions? Concerns? None, obviously, because this is such a foolproof idea. Like, what are we doing, man?
Discriminatory practices of the immigration system, most notably the national origins quota regime, but in so doing also dramatically expanded the scale and complexity of immigration without fundamentally rethinking how the system would be administrated or enforced. When the workload of a legal system expands but its machinery remains the same, the system begins to rely on larger and larger amounts of discretion just to function. It has to cut corners. What do I mean? Well, if you wanted to govern a vastly expanded immigration system by statute with, I'm just a bill, yes, I'm only a bill, the sheer molecular complexity of the system would cause everything to grind to a halt. Any meaningful change could take
Got me waggling
years.
my finger.
It's
and
like
shit.
Factorio or SimCity, right? If you
Video
build layer
game.
upon layer of systems without having planned the whole thing from the start, eventually the center becomes
mess.
a tangled knot that you can no longer touch without the system unraveling. In immigration
My wife's
law,
calling
Congress
me.
is
I'm going to let this guy continue to be
distant from the
amazing and
knot at the
eloquent while I
center.
talk to her.
The executive branch is not. So Congress increasingly points to the executive, which has been administering the system all along, and says, in effect, you deal with it. And as immigration has continued to grow, continued to become more and more complicated, discretion and thus power has steadily moved away from Congress and towards the presidency. In 1986, this momentum culminates in the IRCA, the Immigration Reform and Control Act. IRCA granted millions of undocumented immigrants lawful status, and its benefits shouldn't be forgotten amidst our conversation. But structurally, IRCA expanded the scope of immigration laws substantially yet again. IRCA created an employer sanctions regime, extending the reach of immigration law deep into the interior of the country. Immigration enforcement was no longer limited to borders or ports of entry. It now touched everyday Americans. It touched workplaces, payrolls, and everyday economic life. The system was expanded to include verification of work authorization, compliance audits, and a massively expanded enforcement bureaucracy. The knot keeps getting bigger and more tangled, Congress gets more and more distant from it, and the executive branch's influence continues to grow. This is then followed by an explosion of complexity in the Immigration Act of 1990. New legal pathways are created, employment-based visas, a diversity visa lottery, temporary protected status, etc. But underlying these expansions was Congress's full embrace of administrative governance of immigration. And from
Okay. Dilemma. We have somewhere to be within the hour, essentially. This video is incriminating or is encroaching on my time frame. So I don't know. I don't know what to do. Wipe my nose. What? There's nothing on my nose. I guess we can put a pin in it and watch the rest tomorrow or next time or something like that. Alrighty. So once again, this is a new day, but we got cut off. So we're going to be watching the remainder of this one to start the day. All right.
expansions was Congress's full embrace of administrative governance of immigration. And from this point on, immigration policy, not just the execution but the policy, stops being shaped by congressional statutes at large and more by executive interpretation. Congress has now officially given the executive branch all the tools. And in 1996, this administrative transformation is hardened in the Illegal Immigration Reform and Immigrant Responsibility Act, or IRA-IRA. IRA dramatically broadened the grounds
IRA,
of deportability,
IRA.
introduced expedited removals, expanded mandatory detention, and continued to restrict judicial review. For the purposes of efficiency in immigration, procedural safeguards are shaved away, and we are left with an administrative, civil system that wields
Bill.
coercive power in the form of detention and removal without judicial oversight. Immigration enforcement after IRA is now nationwide, interior, civil, discretionary, insulated from review, and punitive in effect. At this point already, immigration is in a dangerous place as a body of law, and it functions almost completely outside of its constitutional origins.
Very true.
But this is just the beginning. The full executive branch takeover of immigration, even now, has yet to come.
Well, that's
On
exciting.
September 11th, 2001,
What?
the United States experienced terror.
What a transition.
I'm a New Yorker, and I remember it vividly.
What?
Vividly. Parents pulling their kids out of school, crying.
I'm sorry.
shaking the stony silence of my own parents and teachers.
Just went to 9/11 out of no way. I mean, okay, my bad. Sorry. I guess, it makes sense because 9/11 started a lot of racial discrimination, especially in New York, to a lot of like people that are like Middle Eastern descents and stuff. That was just such a jarring. It was just out of nowhere, I guess. I don't know.
In the ashy, dusty air. And nearly 3,000 people were killed that day, not by a foreign army crossing a border,
why
but
is
by
Claire
individuals who
de Lune
entered the
playing
country
right now, bro?
lawfully, who had lived in it and who had used our trust against us. In the immediate aftermath, the central failure identified by
turn it up a
policymakers
smidge?
was not a lack of laws, but a lack of integration.
You beat the shit out of
Intelligence
you.
was fragmented between too many parties, and enforcement
It's very
responsibilities
quiet, to
were
be
dispersed
fair.
across dozens of
I can
agencies
barely hear
in
it too. I
overlapping
just recognize
jurisdictions.
the
Immigration enforcement, border control, customs inspections, aviation security, and internal intelligence all operated in parallel instead of in concert. At the time, immigration enforcement functions were primarily housed with the Immigration and Naturalization Service, or the INS.
No
which
way,
itself
the
was part of
government
the DOJ.
miscommunicating? That's
Customs
crazy.
enforcement operated separately under the Treasury
No.
Department. Border Patrol, Interior Enforcement,
Never.
Visa Monitoring, etc. were all spread out across various institutions. No single department had unified responsibility for preventing threats that originated not abroad, but domestically. In response to these observations, in 2002, Congress passed the Homeland Security Act, and in the following year, the Department of Homeland Security, or DHS, came into existence. It was the largest reorganization of the federal government since the creation of the Department of Defense, now the Department of War, in 1947. DHS consolidated 22 separate agencies under a single
Department of War.
department. The stated goal was prevention. Detect threats earlier and eliminate bureaucratic red tape to facilitate a timely response. Immigration, you will recall, was one of the many disparate elements jammed into
The problem with getting rid of and like, it's kind of a lose-lose because essentially, what, yeah, you want a quick response when it comes to emergencies like this. Ideally, in an ideal scenario, yeah, like you'd want these people to be responding quickly to a crisis, right? At the same time, the issue with giving people in charge of this stuff, like the ability to like leap over the governmental constraints that keep people in check, is they just do it regardless of the scenario every time. So, we have stuff like what happened up in Minneapolis 50 times over since this happened. Like, just any reason to deploy them is seen as a domestic threat. And it's probably still happening. Yeah, that's true. And like, it's framed that way in order to like allow them to just like step over the constraints every single time. That's the issue, is like, yeah, you'd want something in case that there's like no time to waste. But the problem with allowing it to be the case no matter what, it makes situations like this happen where it's like, why are you even here? Nothing is even happening. But they technically are legally allowed because there's nothing constraining them compared to the rest of the governmental bodies that could respond. So I don't know. I don't have a good alternative, but the problem is the way it is now, it's Like,
Almost 30 months.
they
Wow.
obviously, from what we've seen the past couple of weeks, they've misused it time and time again.
into the DHS. And with that change, immigration escaped the boundaries of mere civil administration and became embedded into a wider national security network, alongside counterterrorism and domestic intelligence operations. This was by design, it was intentional, shaped by the fear of 9/11. And from this all emerged
true.
an enforcement apparatus that is structurally unique and uniquely problematic.
Sorry.
An anomaly of law and policy, the consequences of which lawyers have warned about ever since its creation. When the INS was dismantled, its functions were divided up amongst 3 new agencies housed within the DHS. There was U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, or USCIS, which was assigned responsibility for immigration benefits and general adjudications.
Holy shit,
There
pop
was
off.
Customs and Border Patrol, or CBP, which was tasked with border and port of entry enforcement. And finally, there was Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, which was created to handle interior immigration enforcement and related investigative functions. ICE formally came into existence in 2003. From the outset, it was structured as a civil enforcement agency and was not designed to catch criminals. Once again, it's a civil agency. Its legal authority derives from the Immigration and Nationality Act, and its core mission is strictly administrative: the investigation, detention, and removal of non-citizens deemed removable under federal law. It was also given nationwide domestic jurisdiction, meaning
Which once again, like, the problem is like, yes, it's true that they're a civil organization, etc., right? But because it's a smaller branch of this branch that got full domestic authority, they can just sort of decide it's important or deem it as a threat. And that's where the issues arise. Once more, is like, they just get to arbitrarily be like, this is a concern now, so we're going to show up. And that's where you get situations like what's happening in Minnesota, where, like, they've just sort of taken the situation and created it to be even more volatile, basically in order to justify the aggressive approach and the aggressive occupancy, which, you know, as we all know at this point, resulted in multiple people dying. Not just the one guy you heard about. There's multiple people, but you heard about the one white guy. That's the problem, is there's other people who have died. They're just not a white dude, so, like, you're not going to hear about it, which is a bunch of shit. But that's the issue, is like, there's no amount of culpability, because they've basically been given a thumbs up of, like, protect the country, you know, if that makes sense. Which, once again, is just, it creates every issue. I mean, it's funny that, I mean, people make jokes about 9/11 and stuff like that, but it's actually kind of crazy how many things have happened due to it. Like, the American response to 9/11 has rippled for 2 decades at this point and will continue to. Like, you've heard this guy go into detail about all of this stuff started in, like, 2002, 2003. Like, I started in 2003. He said so. Like, all of this stuff stems unironically because 9/11 happened. And it's not even necessarily that the event that caused it. It's the response of America that has resulted in this sort of invulnerability in terms of their flexibility. Yeah, like, have you guys ever asked your older relatives what airports were like before 9/11 if you're an American? It's shocking. I talked to my dad once about it, and it was like none of it existed how it did. The only reason American airports and other airports are like this now because of American influence. The only reason it's like this is because of 9/11. It's kind of mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing the cultural impact that it has and continues to have. And once again, not just on the internet, like not just as a joke on the internet or like a historic point in books. Like culturally, it's changed a ton of stuff and continues to. Like everything you're seeing lately with ICE, etc., is a domino effect of America's response to 9/11. And essentially, and another increasingly added layer, like it was basically used by George Bush as a way to justify going to war in order to secure a second term, which then just increases the volatility towards the Middle East and anybody who is even closely resembling Middle Eastern descent. So, you know, it's upsetting. It's upsetting to think about. It's also like, in a way, very fascinating to like think about how much sort of rippled from this one thing to the point where some of y'all weren't even alive for it. I barely was alive for it. I don't even think I remember it that well. I have a memory of it, but I'm pretty sure that's just my ass like psychologically tricking myself, which is a very common thing to pretend you know stuff from your childhood, but you're like just making shit up so you're not like, oh my God, I didn't remember anything. So there are things happening because of this that people who weren't even around for it are affected by. Like people are going to be more affected by this that weren't even there for it, weren't even alive for it to happen, weren't even conscious when it happened. It's kind of crazy. It's kind of crazy to think about. Like I was almost 5, I think. It was wild. I don't know, man. I guess we kind of went on a tangent there, but I think it's an important thing. I think it's an important thing to sort of think about and look at, because yeah, it's ridiculous to think that what was a tragedy, objectively, 25 years ago, that's how long it's been, is continuing to affect American culture especially, and American governmental like rules and responsibilities. It's kind of crazy.
53 months. And it crime time? Did I miss anything yet? Also
Smidge.
been lonely few weeks, so thanks Sneeg and chat for providing a space to feel less lonely.
All right, I'm gonna jump off my soapbox, and we're gonna continue this. You know what I mean?
That its officers are not confined to any ports of entry or border zones. They can operate all throughout the interior of the United States with authority to investigate and arrest based on immigration status rather than criminal conduct.
Which is a problem.
You see, unlike traditional law enforcement agencies, ICE primarily enforces civil law rather than criminal statutes. Although certain immigration-related conduct is criminalized, immigration enforcement typically proceeds through the civil system by design and discretion rather than criminal prosecution. As a result, most immigration violations are treated as civil matters. Removal proceedings are administrative.
And it's a completely different ballgame in terms of the court when it comes to civil, like legislation and stuff like that. And I mean, I'm pretty sure if I remember this video at the other week when we watched the first part, like he already mentioned this. Like it becomes a whole problem that it's like completely separate because they operate basically as the police, except they were given practically full immunity because they're not criminally prosecuting. So, and because of all of their flexibility, they can just say it's an immigration issue and claim that it's an immigration issue, and they don't have to prove anything before they actually do it half the time. And regardless, even though sometimes they do have to prove it, half the time everybody just throws their hands up and lets them do it anyway, because nobody knows what the rules are, because they're completely different. And that's where the huge issue arises.
And detention commonly occurs without the initiation of criminal charges. This is an important distinction because there are procedural safeguards that typically accompany criminal policing. There are indictments, jury trials, proof beyond a reasonable doubt, and oversight by the judiciary.
Huh?
These immigration violations, being civil in nature,
Damn,
are
I'm
not
good.
subject to the same procedural safeguards, but the severity of
How do
implementation
you know?
of these rules in response are not meant to be as harsh or as punitive as criminal violations. At the time of its creation, this structure was presented as practical, but immigration lawyers who could see the writing on the wall began sounding the alarm. Because what ICE represents
Wait,
practical, but immigration
What was that
lawyers
article
could see
from?
the writing on the
2011. 2011 is that article on the left. The American Immigration Council and the American Immigration Lawyers Association have received widespread reports of restrictions on access to counsel imposed upon non-citizens detained in ICE custody. We're writing today to highlight our concerns in hope of beginning a dialogue about these issues. 2011. And I doubt that's the first.
wall began sounding the alarm. Because what ICE represented was something completely new in American governance, a civil enforcement agency with nationwide reach, broad discretionary authority, operating outside of the criminal justice
these
system under
masked
direct
weenies, bro.
executive control. It was all of the worst fears of the framers put together. A federal, domestically oriented civil police force, not accountable.
This is in a courtroom, by the way. This is the clip of the dude getting detained by ICE as he's in the court, like the courthouse, to get his citizenship, if I remember right.
To state governments given
What
unprecedented
the
leeway
fuck?
to act by Congress.
What
and
do you
the
want from
courts
him?
under the exclusive control
It's yeah,
of the
exactly.
president. Let's look at an illustrative example, because it's one thing to talk about the legal theory and another to see it in practice.
Yep.
Let's say
That's
you're
true.
driving in New York City, and you've been pulled over for a traffic violation. This constitutes a Fourth Amendment seizure, with a scope and duration limited to the purpose of the stop. A police officer must have at least a reasonable suspicion that a traffic law has been violated, and
Yes.
then the officer
And this is important. Eventually, they will have to somewhat plead that. They will have to somewhat make their case that they were reasonably suspicious. They can't just say that, waltz in, cause a whole kerfuffle, and then let's just like make some bullshit up and get away with it. In an ideal scenario, obviously, like the police do a bunch of stupid corruption all the time. In the ideal scenario, they're not allowed to just like pull somebody over, be like, you smell like weed, even though you might not, and then search your car and be like, I found weed. They would have to somehow show or like make their case in which they were suspicious. Maybe not immediately at the time of the scene, but at some point later on, if it continues to escalate.
can ask you for your license and registration to run a check and address the reason for the stop. To extend this stop beyond the time reasonably required to handle the ostensible traffic violation, the officer needs independent or reasonable suspicion of other criminal activity, such as, for example, human trafficking. If the officer wishes to search the car, the officer must meet legal requirements to do so. The officer must either get consent, have probable cause to believe the vehicle contains contraband or evidence of a crime, must perform the search incident to arrest, or has a reasonable belief that the person stopped is dangerous or may gain immediate control of firearms or weapons. The officer cannot arbitrarily detain you or hold you against your will. The detention must be justified at its inception and
Doesn't mean they don't try to, but yeah, in the ideal scenario, they're not meant, they can't just like do it. They can't do it and then find a reason. They have to be suspicious and then explain the suspicion in some regard and then also find more issues to continue detainment. So yeah.
reasonably related in scope and duration to the reason for the stop.
And I'm sure a lot
Once
of you can
criminal
imagine
arrest
how this
occurs, the
is,
state's power
you know,
becomes visible.
contorted
The arrest
and
is recorded. The charges
used
must be
to their
articulated.
to
the
their
individual
advantage.
is placed into a system where lawyers, judges, and family can locate them. Disappearance is not a feature of the criminal process. Now let's take that same hypothetical but change only one thing. Instead of a local police officer enforcing criminal law, the encounter is initiated by Immigration and Customs Enforcement. To start, ICE has statutory authority to approach and question people about immigration status. The Immigration and Nationality Act authorizes immigration officers to interrogate any alien or person believed to be an alien as to his right to be or to remain in the United States, as set forth in 8 U.S.C. Section 1357A1. In practice, that means an ICE encounter can begin the way many police encounters begin, as questioning that is presented as voluntary.
Right.
Let's say then that the ICE officer believes that you, for whatever reason, might be a non-citizen. The INA authorizes that officer then to conduct a warrantless arrest if they have, and I quote, reason to believe that the alien so arrested is in the United States in violation of any law or regulation and is likely to escape before a warrant can be obtained.
Any
as
law,
per 8
by the
USC
way.
Section
That's a very important
1357A2.
thing to bring up.
Courts have generally construed
Any
that
law.
reason to believe language to satisfy the Fourth
Which is
Amendment's
a
probable
problem.
cause requirement for an arrest. But take note that it is probable cause of civil removability, not probable cause of a crime. The underlying violation is not criminal conduct. This is where immigration enforcement begins to diverge from the way
Nice,
most
you
people
immediately
imagine
corrected me. I
statutory
love
law
that.
operates. While the INA provides formal authority, what governs is not statute in isolation, but layers upon layers of regulations, internal policies, and executive discretion, much of it opaque even to us lawyers, which as a result
Not good.
makes ICE decisions difficult to challenge or oppose in real time.
Gives
In any
them
case,
reasonable
once a person is taken into ICE
doubt.
custody, the legal terrain shifts again. Unlike the criminal justice system, where detention is tightly linked to charges, bail determinations, and court schedules,
And
immigration
regulations.
detention operates through administrative decision-making. Detentions can be arbitrary at times, and release decisions are often made by immigration officers or administrative judges. Every single person your case touches is inside of the executive branch and operates at the discretion of the president. There is no uniform bright-line requirement that detentions be short, nor is one guaranteed an early adversarial hearing before an independent Article 3 judge. In practice, individuals may remain in custody for extended periods while administrative processes unfold, appeals are pending, or removal logistics are arranged. Transfers between facilities can occur without notice to family or counsel. Venue and jurisdiction can suddenly change. Access to representation can be disrupted, and all of these are not bugs but features of a system designed for administrative efficiency over
Intentional.
everything else.
Intentional
From the
design.
outside, this can look like disappearance, not because the law authorizes disappearances, but because the system is not built to prevent it in the way the criminal process is. But back to our stop example. If anything goes awry during the stop, let's say a conflict escalates, firearms are drawn and deadly force is used. The ICE officer is not automatically accountable to any external independent authority outside of the executive branch because the encounter and the law governing it remain administrative rather than criminal. Taken together, this produces a system fundamentally different from ordinary law enforcement. In the criminal process, the state is forced to justify itself early, publicly, and repeatedly, and even then, abuse is not uncommon. In immigration enforcement,
Very true.
justification can be delayed, administratively obfuscated, or even entirely missing. You will note that none of this, so far, requires illegality. None of it requires malice. This is merely the predictable outcome when administrative efficiency is prioritized.
Almost like this is extremely predictable when you're just giving a piece of your government the ability to just do whatever's necessary with no checks and balances. Almost like it would have been really good if we had made some sort of, I don't know, we should just do like make a country where like there's a bunch of checks and balances to keep the governmental power from like abusing it. That would be a great idea. Wouldn't it? Oh, wait, that's literally what America was built on.
Over liberty. Experience should teach us to be most on our regard, to protect liberty when the government's purposes are beneficent. Supreme Court Justice Louis Stembitz Brandeis. In the realm of political science, secret police is not a conclusively defined term. In their 2006 work, Dismantling Tyranny, Transitioning Beyond Totalitarian Regimes, Ilan Berman and Michael Waller define a secret police as political police forces tasked with targeting dissidents and political opponents to preserve the status quo and the physical integrity of the government. In the article Secret Police Organizations and State Repression from the Journal of Conflict Resolution, the authors Marius Merle and Janis Chulis offer a slightly more detailed definition that distinguishes secret police from state security forces as a whole. A secret police is defined therein as an internal security agency that uses violent policing practices and intelligence operations against political opponents or dissidents while being autonomous from the rest of the security apparatus. Merle and Chulis continue then by offering 5 criteria necessary for an internal security agency to be classified as a secret police, taken from various sources and studies of authoritarian regimes across Europe.
Golly, I wonder if they're gonna find a fit with what we're dealing with lately.
Europe, Asia, Africa, and Latin America. The 5 criteria are as follows. Number 1, it is a political police force, denoting that it targets political opponents and dissidents to preserve the status quo. Number 2, it is not controlled by other security agencies and answers directly to the authoritarian leadership. Number 3, the identity of its members and its operations are secret. Number 4, it is an internal security organization that specializes in political intelligence and surveillance operations. And number 5, it carries out violent policing practices such as arbitrary searches, arrests, interrogations, torture, indefinite detention, and disappearances. In essence, then, a secret police is a police force that targets political enemies to protect the regime in power, is controlled by the regime in power, has its identities and operations kept secret, spies on its own countrymen, and uses violent policing to further its goals of keeping the regime in power. A regular police force is responsive to information, has to operate within the limits of a judicial system, is publicly accountable, and cannot act with impunity outside of the bounds of criminal procedure. The criteria we've just reviewed describe an institution designed to operate offensively outside of...
Is Joe gonna start stream soon? I don't fucking care. I don't care. He'll start when he wants to. You can watch here and have a modicum of respect for me as a person instead of Joe's like accessory, or you can just go wait for Joe in his chat. How about that? Sounds good.
The ordinary constraints of law, visibility, and accountability. Now, these characteristics are not typically adopted all at once. Secret police don't just appear fully formed, they emerge gradually as exceptions accumulate, discretion expands, and oversight weakens. It is only in retrospect that the full configuration becomes visible. What makes a secret police force so dangerous isn't just that they use violence, right? It's the institutional conditions under which they appear that permits them to utilize violence without governmental friction. History teaches us this lesson. Every system that has produced a secret police has done so not through a single dramatic act, but through a series of structural decisions that taken individually appear defensible or even sensible at the time. Once those structures are in place, though, the intentions matter less than the design. The ball is already rolling down the hill. The institutions that have been created outlast the individuals that made them, and the outcome is inevitable. The Founding Fathers, the framers of the Constitution, feared most of all not the seizure of power by force, but the lawful accumulation of power assembled in the wrong configuration. The greatest threat of tyranny, as they envisioned it, was not the suspension of the rule of law, but the removal of obstacles to it. You remember the Madison quote, right? Legislative, executive, and judiciary in the same hands is the very definition of tyranny. This is why the Constitution fragments power so aggressively. Legislative power writes the rules, judicial power interprets the rules, and executive power enforces the rules. When these functions remain separate, abuse is slow to coagulate, visible before it becomes a problem, and contestable if it appears. When these powers collapse into one another, however, for the sake of efficiency, so too then does abuse become fast, opaque, and difficult to resist. Institutions rarely become instruments of repression overnight. Instead, they tend to arrive gradually, through perfectly legal steps taken in the name of efficiency, security, or necessity. Discretion expands, oversight thins, accountability shifts inwards. All the decisions that led to this point could have arrived without malice, conspiracy, or any bad intention. But the outcome is a unique organization whose limited safeguards were never designed for the power it now wields, and by the time abuse becomes visible, it is no longer a deviation from that original design, but the logical endpoint of it. By the time the abuse becomes visible, it is difficult to stop it all.
My name is Victoria Slatton. I'm an immigration attorney. I currently have a client who is a U.S. citizen who is
such a beautiful video by this guy.
She was taken yesterday. under very suspicious circumstances, in my opinion. And we have been desperately trying to get her out. We filed habeas last night that was supposed to protect her from being moved and keep her in the jurisdiction. The court actually ruled, giving us an injunction that said she was not allowed to be moved from the jurisdiction.
She got moved
and
anyway.
that she was not allowed to be deported. Despite that, and despite ICE having her birth certificate that shows that she was very clearly born in Maryland, they did move her to Louisiana. That is not a good sign. That is usually a last stop before deportation. They're blatantly ignoring orders from the court. They're not allowing me access to my client, and I am at a loss, and I'm incredibly angry. It is an indisputable...
I've said in a previous video that the law is just words on paper, and that the words become meaningless if they aren't enforced.
Yep.
Legal scholars can cry all day about how federal officers do not
And they
automatically enjoy total immunity under U.S. law.
And
but as you've
they
seen,
love their crying.
ICE is different. The branch in charge of administering responsibility says they're immune, so they are. Who exactly is watching the watchmen? Abolishing ICE doesn't mean abandoning immigration enforcement.
Nope.
It means abolishing an institution whose very structure is an exception in the American legal system, a structure that makes abuse not only possible but likely. The remedy does not require grand sweeping change. It doesn't require utopian reform, and it needn't sacrifice efficiency to great extent. It requires only the reestablishment of constraints that are present everywhere else in our legal system. We could insist, for example, that when force is required, it be exercised through institutions designed and trained for it, rather than collapsing administrative, policing, intelligence, and punitive roles into a single body, where officers receive less than 2 months of training. We could tether detention, loss of liberty, and removal from one's home to the criminal process, with its attendant protections, recognizing that civil administration was never meant to bear punitive weight of this magnitude. We could demand transparency, accountability, and the end of anonymous discretionary enforcement incompatible with democratic governance. None of these ideas are radical. They're older than the agency itself.
It's just
ICE
accountability.
is relatively new. We handled immigration without them before.
You want to know something really interesting? The fact that almost every other police force in the, not every police force, but there are police forces handled way better in other countries by far. In Australia, they train for easily years. On top of the fact that when not every police officer is given a firearm due to, like, you know, obviously not all of their citizens being armed to the teeth. When a firearm is necessary, they end up needing to, like, so the weapons given to police officers in Australia have a tracker on them. And even if they unholster their gun, it logs it to their station. And then they have to go and explain why they even unholstered it. And also it does that for when the trigger is pulled. Like, there is an obscene amount of, like, checks and balances when it comes to Australian police who have a firearm. It's impressive. It's impressive, and it's very, like, from my point of view, it's very, like, that would be amazing. It's pretty, I mean, at this point, I think, like, the government doesn't want to work on training whatsoever, because every politician gets, like, some sort of pat on the back by Americans for saving money, so they want to be all cheap and shit. But, like, being able to have more responsibility put on the officer is always going to end up being good, because as we see throughout this entire video and throughout the entirety of our life lately, they will take advantage of it every single time, almost practically every time, especially ICE, because, like this guy is explaining, the rules and constraints behind ICE orient around civil legislation, not criminal legislation, which is a completely different thing. And the rules and the responsibilities and the deviations and the shot calling is all separate people. And so the rules are completely different. So when people like see these things happening are like, why aren't these guys being criminally prosecuted for what they're doing? They're technically immune. In a lot of ways, they are technically immune. There are other ways to get them in trouble. There are other ways to make them responsible, but they have basically been given jurisdiction to be menaces to anybody they deem as a problem. And that's the umbrella of this guy's entire video, which I think he's done a beautiful job of encapsulating, but yeah.
And we surely will after they're gone. In the making of this video, I've talked to folks on both sides of the bench. I admit my own political biases, and I understand that especially conservative folks amongst you may find immigration to be a more pressing issue than I do. Even so, whatever one's views on immigration might be, the danger posed by ICE should concern us all. My fear is that if ICE is allowed to persist in its current form, even if it is not pushed further today, it will someday be tested by circumstances
what makes you think it won't
less
escalate?
restrained, by leadership less cautious,
exactly.
or by fear more acute.
Like, what makes you think that they wouldn't escalate this power beyond immigration? They're getting away with it now. If they want to get away with it more or on. The fuck happened? I'm just sitting there and I look to my right and my camera's frozen. I'm like, oh, my camera broke. Instead, no, my entire OBS froze. They're on to me. What the hell? Bro, it's impossible to watch this video. Shit's just happening every time I try to watch this video, dude. It's almost done. What
And
the
when
hell
that
happened?
day comes, the cost could be nothing less than American democracy as we know it. I hope my fear may never come to pass. But if it should come, if a secret police really does come to America, it is the responsibility of every American to resist. Deep in my heart,
Sick.
I do believe we shall overcome someday. I've been your host, Mooney. I hope this video wasn't too jarring for
They're onto
my
you.
usual audience. If this video resonated with you, share it and use it to talk with your friends, family, and loved ones.
I like this guy.
The goal is not to defeat the other side. There is no other side. There is only unity and humanity. Thank you for tuning in then to this hopefully only special episode of Moon Channel.
I heard him click end recording. Whoa. Started hearing music. I got scared. I mean, what a great video, man. Clearly he's very like insistent that this is not his normal content, but I think he should be way more. This guy is awesome. He did a great job of explaining this, and he did it on a professional level. Because he's quite literally a lawyer and a professional one. So I don't know, man. There's so many problems with it. There's so many issues. I mean, like, you know, I've explained it a little bit myself during this, but I don't know how much better I could make it. I mean, he did such a good job of breaking it down. I don't know, man. There's a problem. I mean, it's a huge problem, and we understand. The problem is once again, like these issues, it's not like well, I mean, I guess at one point Trump did walk up there and just basically say he was making a task force, but that was kind of its own thing and probably still operates in its own way. But you know, something like this doesn't happen in like one fell swoop. They don't just go like, we're going to detain anybody who's concerning looking, and that's going to be racially prejudiced, by the way. It happens through little means and little changes and small insidious flexibility issues. And it's by design, a majority of the time. It's by design. And the problem is there's a lot of technical legal standing they have. The other issue is there's a lot of other legal standing that could be something to hold them culpable for it. But every politician's just a massive fucking weenie right now. Like, I don't know what's going on anymore. Like, nobody wants to poke the bear, but also the bear is just like slashing everybody apart with his claws, and they're like, well, I guess the bear's upset. Where's the fucking sleep dart? Like, what's happening, dude? What are we fucking doing? What are you doing? I can't do shit. Like, what are you doing? I don't know. This guy did a great job on this video. I like this guy. Once again, I don't feel like he posts stuff like this regularly, but I think he did a really good job on this one. I would love if he did more.